Welcome, everybody. How are you doing? David here with this week's Griscom stream. Looking forward to it. Hope you're good wherever you're at. It's hot as hell here, but I am ready to go. We got some fun stuff to get to. As always, feel free to jump in with any kind of questions or topics you might want to hear me respond to. We got a really fun show coming up for y'all tomorrow. I can't wait. We had Charade on from the National Iranian American Council to talk about how Joe Biden has been fumbling the Iran deal, what that really means for everyday working people in Iran. Really looking forward to sharing that conversation with y'all much more. Next week, I'm going to be out of town, but we have a full episode and show coming for y'all then too. We're going to be talking with Matt Huber, who just came out with his great book on class war and climate change. Really looking forward to sharing all of that with y'all very soon. We got some fun stuff come up in the bonus shows, so be sure to subscribe, patreon.com/leftreckoning. But let's get to it. I want to make sure we're able to get to as many questions as possible since I'll be out of town next week. But let's see. I got a couple stories. I want to talk about this Joe Biden thing because the Biden administration is really I don't think it's necessarily surprising, but it has been interesting to see just how much they have continued kind of Trump policies of, rationing up pressure against countries all over the world, but predominantly Iran and South America as well. And yeah, we got some fun stuff. Well, let's see. We already got one in here from Cameron, who says that they've seen Matt Bender's debate with Tim Pool. Where do these weirdos come from, and how are they just raking in viewers and cash? I mean, I haven't seen Matt Bender's debate. I don't know if I'm going to be able to subject myself to it, but there's a lot of money kind of like half-assed, half thought out takes, especially if you're just riding, the media cycle. I mean, you have to run one of these channels to get all that information really, but they're, YouTube really does sort of reward somebody who's sort of chasing after kind of, whatever's popular on weird kind of Twitter drama or just sort of, clickbaity stories. And guys like Poole, they swim in those waters. And, think about it, like even like TMBS, like, Michael went down and interviewed Lula, right? An incredible interview. It's worth watching. I should see it if you haven't yet. And like, that was one of our worst performing videos. Like sitting with a world leader, former president in jail in Brazil. And YouTube really suppresses that kind of stuff. Now, kind of hot takes about whether or not trans people should have rights. YouTube loves that shit. And I mean, it's it shouldn't be too surprising for folks what sort of gets pushed up to the top of the feeds on YouTube. And, guys like Tim Pool are very happy swimming in that waters, I guess. But I don't keep up with it too much. But talking about something else, I want to see something pretty psycho here. I saw this the other day. I don't know if y'all have seen this yet, but it's something else. This is this is something that premiered earlier this week. A war game scenario from all the folks over at NBC. Let's just share this real quick because this is one of those things, we're going to talk about it tomorrow with Saul, but it is very worrying to see the way that the U.S. media is starting to really prime itself up for conflict again. I mean, you've seen that in a way, in the way that, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has been covered, that you can see that there is a class of people, particularly in the media, who are just as bloodthirsty as ever and have only been emboldened over the past couple of months. But this stuff is next level. This is from NBC. This is them trying to do war games about a potential Chinese invasion of Taiwan. And let's just play a couple minutes of this because it really is something else. This is them. This is like their teaser. This is their promo. This is trying to get you to sign up and give them money to watch this shit.
Welcome back. In our final episode of this season's Meet the Press Reports, we put together a remarkable war game simulation of how the U.S. might react if China invaded Taiwan. The National Security Think Tank Center for a New American Security, or CNAS, convened two teams. The blue team representing the United States and the red team representing China. Which side would prevail? Would China attack the U.S. mainland? Could nuclear war break out? The conflict takes place in 2027, There are 3 rounds of strategy, and I spoke to the game master after each round to see where the conflict stood. Here's a look.
As you can see here on the map is a very large concentration of Chinese People's Liberation Army forces at potential ports of debarkation for an invasion.
We want to focus on a last-ditch effort to deter. This is a time to be sending the strongest possible message to Beijing, both privately and publicly, that there will be very severe costs if they actually go through with this.
China has sort of seen our reaction to Ukraine, and we want to make sure that we're surprising them with how we react here.
Hit the Americans as hard as we possibly can in the Western Pacific, keep them out of the fight while we move on.
I would support punch against Guam.
The priority for the first 24 hours is to try to go as fast as possible against Taipei, right? I think it matters.
I mean, this is about as bloodthirsty as it gets, right? I mean, it's probably one of the most American things ever. After your Sunday dinner with your family, to go in and subscribe and make sure that you can watch live security experts in the United States sort of outline a potential conflict, which, by the way, like, let's not forget the circumstances here. Any kind of conflict like the one that they're playing around with right now would be absolutely devastating on a world historic level, would lead to millions of people dead. And, let's remember that, war games as like a strategic exercise, maybe for some folks in like military studies, or even people in, the kind of think tank world, maybe they have their place, right? Maybe this is just, trying to understand the world and sort of go through different scenarios, right? Let's just leave that there. To put this up as an entertainment product is something just so diabolical and so bloodthirsty here. And it reminds you of the role that most of these security think tanks play in this country. Because what is the argument at the end of the day going to be here? Oh, well, the United States was ready and they're going to win. But it also shows that we need to invest a hell of a lot more money, millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars more, into the United States empire and to the United States ability to project power abroad. I mean, that's the undertone here. Is trying to sort of prime an American public for war, because it is that fearful state that has been so bounteous for the private contractors, for the defense industry, and these kind of semi-neutral seeming think tanks that play in security studies. They're downstream from all this kind of shit too. It is in their interest to see a more alarmed and alerted American population that is willing to spend much more money on weapons, and is willing to support, for example, Biden pushing more troops into that part of the world. I mean, it's truly something else, and it's so eerie to watch in a way, even though, like, I think most people who are watching this program, sort of don't have any illusions about the intentions of those kind of folks. It is truly amazing to sort of present something like this. Again, a devastating war presented as an entertainment product to sort of round up your Sunday evening before you go to bed, and then spend the next 5 days of your life, working for somebody else's bottom line. Truly, truly grotesque stuff. And if there should be any reminder for folks about why we can't, why we need to really be continuing to push back against this kind of mainstream American news media hegemony, is this, right? Because remember, like, we're seeing this now with the kind of push for the United States government to fight against misinformation. But where did that come from, right? That came out in 2016 when many, many Americans started to say, you know what? I don't trust the big cable news providers. They've been lying to us for a very long time, and they started to have pretty significant and justified suspicions of that group of folks. And then all throughout the Trump administration is basically this tour of goodwill from people in that industry who, let's not forget, played a big role in sort of propping up Trump in the first place. But there was this whole, post-truth America. We need to go back to the, to kind of establish legacy media, because this kind of, people relying on the internet and independent journalism is too dangerous for our democracy. We need to let the experts come back into play. And we've seen this kind of resurgence. I mean, the Trump administration years were very, very good for companies like this. And you're seeing now, when they sort of have come back into prominence, or at least, gotten more trust from liberals again, what they want to do. with that trust that they have sort of regained from folks. And it's this kind of shit. It's priming the American population for war. Truly, truly disheartening shit. Let's watch another couple minutes, and then I'll get to some questions from y'all. But I just had to share this because this was truly something else.
To deter the United States, Japan, Australia, and other countries from intervening.
All right, Stacey, high level here. What just happened with Move 1?
China's invaded Taiwan. It began by attacking Taiwan's outlying islands near the mainland. Then it followed it with a large air and missile strike on Taiwan and on U.S. bases in Japan and on U.S. bases in Guam and the Northern Marianas. In response to that, the United States followed up with bomber attacks on on Chinese ships in port, and there was an air battle over Taiwan where American aircraft flying from the Philippines came in and engaged in combat with Chinese aircraft that were trying to bomb Taiwan.
So after Move 1, can you assess which team is winning? If you want to find out what the winning move was, and I'm sure you do, check out Meet the Press Reports wherever you get NBC News Now.
Lord help us all. Yeah, no, of course, the dangerous, duplicitous Chinese are willing to go much further in bombing American bases and bombing mainland Japan. I mean, just completely psychotic. One, like the premise is psychotic. And then two, making it seem like the Chinese are just sort of operating from this purely self-interested, evil, calculus with no kind of care for human life. Again, this is a fantasy of people who get paid way too much to sit around in offices in D.C. and New York City, who are actively right now trying to prime the American population for a devastating war, as if what we're seeing right now from the conflict in Ukraine with Russia's invasion is not enough to sate the bloodthirsty nature of many people in the American media. They have to create new scenarios down the line, something new for you to be afraid of, something new to sort of get people back in line behind the military-industrial complex. Truly, truly dark shit. Well, yeah, we got some more stuff to get to. I want to talk about Biden and the Summit of the Americas, but I'd be really happy to take some questions from the chat. I know I saw a couple as we were going, so let me see if I can scroll up and find those, and I can take a couple. Okay, here's a question here. Let me make this larger so I can see it. Loris Ultimate says, how should the DSA deal with internationalism? The YDSA chapter I run was divided on the Cuba protests. I supported the Cuban government and did not know how the DSA should deal with statements on such. Well, there's two questions there. There's the political question of what your posture should be for Cuba and what the organization should be doing. I think at this point, if you're looking at what America is trying to do in Cuba, and we're going to come back to Cuba in just a moment, you absolutely have to support the island's ability to self-determination and to be able to, pursue their own kind of politics and their own kind of democracy. And as an American, that's where it really should, that should be the line that you're crossing, the line that you're holding. As to internally within organizations like this, I mean, these are the things that I think we've seen them play out over the past few months within the organization, that, trying to find a way to sort of hold a vigorous debate on these things is truly important in building up stronger protocols, which really didn't, exist, prior to this huge influx of membership beforehand. That's an ongoing process that, like, excuse me, is a technical process for sure. And I think working on ways to make that better is important, but really being able to create forums where people can not only debate, but also get educated on this, because I'm sorry, you're coming from, kind of US based education. You're not going to have a very well, defined or refined take on Cuba because you've been swallowing a lot of propaganda your entire life. And I think that this is where, people sometimes get bored of me when I say this, but this is where political education is so important. So that we're not only educating ourselves and understanding the world around us, but we're also building some kind of solid mass line within organizations where we understand why we take the positions that we're taking, why we're standing for the fights that we're taking. And if we don't understand them internally, it's going to be very, very difficult to be able to project those arguments externally. But that's a process, and I think that there's a lot of people who are working on that right now. Not always perfect, but that with the kind of dysfunction that you're seeing within your chapter there, I think come out of the real need for an organization that's growing and this has more national sway than it ever has before. To build those kind of protocols there. Let's see. Yeah, feel free to jump in with any questions. I'm coming down to the bottom now, so I'll see anything that I've missed. Love those little explosion graphics. I know. I mean, you gotta appreciate the high quality nature of that kind of insane anti-human propaganda there. And honestly, like I was thinking about it when I was watching this. Like, imagine if you had just flipped to the channel for a second. You could very well believe that invasion had been underway, kind of like War of the Worlds, the War of the Worlds story. We got a regional question from friend Strom. Strom, have you launched your channel yet? I'm looking forward to seeing it. Strom says, is Buc-ee's okay as far as gas station barbecue goes? I figured that you, a Texan, would know the answer to that question. They just opened a location in Florence. I don't know. I mean, when it comes to barbecue, like from places like a Buc-ee's or Rudy's or things like that, they're just, I'm not trying to cop out, but like they're just different categories. Like for like a barbecue that you're going to get at a big ass gas station that's like bigger than a couple football fields, Buc-ee's is, pretty decent. Is it like better than something that you're going to get if you drive 5 minutes down the road? Probably not. But like those places have their role. I don't know. Sometimes you just sort of need something quick and you want brisket. I can't speak to the quality as these places leave Texas. I mean, I've been, especially as Austin becomes such like a big player nationally, I'm seeing like the Alamo Draft House theaters that got bought out by a big corporation. Now they're opening up draft houses across the country. And I mentioned the one in New York, and it's trash compared to any of the ones I've been here in Texas. Also, shout out to the people at South Lamar here who are trying to unionize their Alamo Draft House here. But I don't know. I mean, you definitely start to lose a bit of quality when you start getting further away from folks. And also you don't have a clientele that's going to be as picky. I think this is a conversation that we should do somebody else in the future, because they said the fact that China doesn't take Taiwan says something, doesn't it? What do you think China thinks is their long-term goal for handling Taiwan? I presume they know they can play it out. They can play it out sort of. I think that might deserve like a little bit more in-depth show to give like a proper take to. I think it'd be wrong to think that China doesn't have any interest in sort of reuniting, bringing Taiwan back into the country at large. I think that would be a mistake. But I think the reason that they haven't shows that there's an understanding that would be a global conflict, and it's a very, very it is a very, very worrying conflict that has always sort of been sitting on the periphery. That could become hot anytime. And like the Americans were all right here, particularly American media, sort of fantasizing about it, I think is something that you should be very worried about. But I think, getting somebody who can speak a little bit more clearly on internal politics in China would be more helpful than me just sort of hypothesizing on it. As an American, I think that that the basic answer just needs to be that you need to be supporting any kind of diplomacy. And not whatever the fuck that NBC segment just was. Sella Lewis says, have any thoughts on Charles Booker's Senate run in Kentucky and how we can leverage left campaigns in the South? I think that it would be great if Booker's able to win. You can see how much the Democratic Party is willing to sort of line up and do these kind of failed blue dog Democrat campaigns against any kind of progressives in the South. I mean, I loved particularly his first run. Was it From the Hood to the Holler was one of the kind of unofficial slogans there. I love that campaign. I thought that was really smart. Remember, there's a lot of money to be made even in losing campaigns for the Democratic Party. They love to run and get money, particularly from like centrist, moderate Democrats. So holding those kind of seats that, could be winnable, sort of just out of reach. Oh, if we only had $15 million more, is very, very viable for them as a party. And they're willing to play that game because, as we've seen time and time again, the Democratic Party isn't very interested in doing the actual work of fighting. They're much more interested in sort of managing democracy. As to how we can leverage left campaign in the South, I mean, I've done a lot on talking about the kind of particularities of different Southern states and people in the South and how to win there. The quick answer is that it's the same everywhere, right? I mean, it's just like what we have to do is the same everywhere. We have to build independent people power because the institutions, particularly the Democratic Party, are completely hostile to any kind of worker control or working class campaigns. So that's the question if you're in New York City or if you're in Kentucky. But I think that there is a huge lost opportunity in the South in particular to start to win these elections. If you didn't see, we had our friends on from the Valley Labor Report recently to talk about the upcoming governor election in Alabama. And in that, there's been these huge labor fights in Alabama. And the Democratic Party has largely been silent on these, giving the right wing, not all of them, and certainly duplicitous, don't get me wrong, but giving the right wing the opportunity to sit here and be like, we're the people who stand up for workers. There was a great piece in Jacobin a couple of years ago. We interviewed Dustin Costello on it, on this program, about how Jeff Sessions, of all people, was showing up in defense of one of the TVA unions for computer workers there at the TVA who were seeing their jobs being outsourced and seeing the union being sort of torn apart. And it wasn't the Democratic Party that was really there showing up. I mean, you got a little bit of pissing and moaning from some figures in the Democratic Party, but it was always from away, while the Republicans were showing up on the ground. And it's absolutely crazy. You look at Alabama right now, where met coal over a year now on strike, the most moving story ever. A bunch of people who've been working hard at this mine for a long time, see that mine go under hard times, agree to a temporary pay cut until the mine becomes profitable. That mine then gets bought out by, New York City-based capital. And they refuse to negotiate with these miners for over a year. That's the easiest thing in the world as a politician, to stand up on the front line with those folks. And the Republicans are doing it completely. There's only one guy really who's showing up there, and even him, it's pretty weak sauce stuff. But that's what happens when you completely cede working class politics. Is you give the right wing the opportunity to sort of win those battles. I'm sorry, it should be easy as hell for any Democratic Party candidate worth their cents to be showing up at those fights, or showing up at the fights here in Texas at Beaumont, where you've seen ExxonMobil run a very, very brutal anti-union campaign there, right? Easy as hell to show up for people who are organized, are activated, are politicized. Those are people who should be winning. And it just shows we can't, it'd be foolish to wait on the Democratic Party for a lot of reasons, but they're just not even going to show up, even if it's in their own self-interest for labor. And we have to be doing that kind of work. So the answer is, again, the same as everywhere. It's just, we got to get organized. We got to get people politicized, and we have to be, painting the picture in the right way, because the right wing is trying to fill in that gap right now to very devastating results for the rest of us. And there shouldn't be any kind of reality where Republican candidates are outflanking the left ever. Henry McMaster made a bizarre spectacle out of the ground opening. So weird. It's just weird to see it when those kind of companies start moving around. Oh, hell yeah. Well, looking forward to this then. Strom is launching his channel, launching tomorrow, how to get a new computer that can handle DaVinci Resolve. You're using fancier stuff than me. Trying to edit videos on an old laptop was quite the experience. Yeah, it sucks. I don't like to do it at all. A friend here too says, I hope I'm getting your name right, Lars Ultimate says, furthermore, love the last LR episode. How can students bridge the gap between workers and themselves? How can they support unionization? Well, if you're a college student, certainly working with any kind of on the ground, union campaigns. I mean, thinking about, the people who provide the necessary services on campus. That's always been a very, very viable place for just, if not just outright unionization, then, solidarity campaigns, reminding the administration that, your money or tuition is going to this, and you don't want to see people who are working at these facilities who are unable to afford the kind of basic, decency that the student body enjoys. I mean, that is like the height of alienation, right? To be working on a campus where your own children couldn't go. I think that that's always been a very, very viable place for student organizing. I mean, the luxury of being a student is that you don't have those same kind of ties or the same kind of risk as everyone else. I'm not saying it's easy to be a student. Hell, I mean, I was talking about last week, how I was always happy to make decisions about, turning in assignments or going to my shift at the restaurant I was working at. I'm not saying that it's easy at all. But, these things get harder as you start to have more financial responsibilities. So, I mean, there's a hell of a lot of different opportunities from doing things like that. I think that, like, if you're wanting to work and be a part of the working class movement, finding things that are going on within your own campus and where those kind of tensions are is always very viable and can be very helpful for the workers on your campus, as well as obviously supporting things like grad student unions. Grad students are completely abused by. It's amazing that we are living in a system where education is becoming more and more unaffordable, and yet so much of the work of the university is being put onto the shoulders of extremely underpaid grad students. So that's also one that's very viable there as well. They just opened an Alamo Draft House in a newly gentrified area of DC. Yeah, it's definitely become part of the picture there. I just remember when it was sort of, I don't know, when it was novel. Oh, hell yeah, friend. We got some good news here. Nick Nitro says, hey, Griscom, we just had our last union card signed to get us over 50%. Thanks for inspiring. Well, thank you. You're inspiring all of us right here. I'd be curious to learn more about what you're all doing and let us know if there's any way we can help out. Oh, I hope I'm not missing anyone's questions. I'm getting towards the bottom here. Yeah, and it's, I mean, Billy Big Brick says, neither party has any grip on matters of war and national security, but they know that they both must wholeheartedly support it. We're going to talk about this tomorrow with Asal Rod about how insane it is that the Biden administration has completely continued the Trump policy towards Iran. I mean, they're not budging on the IRGC on designating the IRGC as a terrorist organization, which is purely symbolic and actually functionally meaningless, and yet they're not willing to sort of walk that back, the kind of Trump escalation after he walked out of the Iran nuclear agreement, so that we can sort of push for peace and diplomacy. And alleviate the suffering of millions and millions of Iranians who have been suffering so much under these needless sanctions. And of course, and this shit only emboldens the kind of, more right-wing elements within Iran as well, right? If you've seen under Rouhani what you got with negotiation, it opens up a political opportunity for the right. And Biden playing into that playbook, I think, there's a lot of things to be pissed at him, but it's definitely towards the top of the list for sure. A friend here is going to be stoked. Super Nintendo says too soon to start the Quinn ears Heisman campaign. Hook them and keep crushing it. I'm looking forward to it. I mean, I'm always optimistic going into these seasons, these Texas Longhorn seasons, but this year I think it could be a lot of fun. I'm bummed. It seems like the Texas Alabama game is probably going to be at 11 a.m., which I've been looking forward to that since they announced it. And it's not going to be a fun day in Texas in September at 11. Well, I appreciate the super chats so much, Mighty Mito, and I always appreciate those chats. They really do help us out a lot, keeping this this channel afloat. All right, let's see if I'm missing anything before we go on. Well, let's talk for a little bit about Biden, and I'll come back for questions. So keep loading those up in there. But I want to talk about this Summit of the Americas thing because it's really, really crazy. And I'm curious. I don't want to, celebrate too early, but I do wonder if we're starting to see a shift in the politics in the Americas here. So, for people who are unfamiliar, they're going to be holding a Summit of the Americas this summer in um, they're going to be hosting this Summit of the Americas in July. And hold up, I'm sorry, let me get to this question first, and I can come back. I'm really sorry to hear this, Lord. I'm sorry, Mighty Mito was in a coma. I'm sorry to hear that. I hope that you're feeling better now. That must have been really tough. Jesus. Um, I hope that I hope that you're getting the care that you need, and thank you for the chat. As always, they want to know. My home state of California has announced the first ever $100 billion dollar budget surplus. What programs and policies would you enact as priorities? I mean, I would definitely top of the list would be a state level kind of Medicare for all system. I'm sure you can appreciate why that's so important for people. You shouldn't be one kind of personal disaster away from bankruptcy. Two, I mean, there's some kind of just basic things that you could be doing. I think investing in public transportation, predominantly high speed rail in California, of all places, is something that is desperately needed. Also, finding ways to revitalize many of the areas in California that have been, decimated by the extremely unequal policies of that state for so long, and doing things like building public housing and working on, stronger rental support and assistance. Those are all things you could do with a $100 billion budget. And I hope that they do more with that. It was surprising to see a state being able to put numbers like that up. But when I see something like that, I mean, it just is like, Lord in heaven, why are you pulling all this money out of the economy right now to just sit in state coffers? I think that progressives should be having a heyday right now, sort of demanding that, hey, we got the money to do these things. Y'all always are saying that the reason we can't get shit done is because we can't find the money. And here's an example. The money's sitting right there. So looking forward to seeing what y'all do with it there. And thanks for the chat. I really do hope you get better. I'm sorry to hear about the coma, man. That's scary. Yeah, and Maria notes too, is like, with our healthcare system, it's a shit show. Thanks for caring. Oh, we're here for you. Yes, on all your priorities. I mean, I'd be curious. I mean, maybe we should do something on that soon. I'd love to get some people on the ground there to talk a little bit more in depth about what campaigns are sort of being pushed up in the next few in the next few months, because I think that the opportunity is there. But yeah, y'all, let's see. Let's do this Summit of the Americas thing, because it's really nuts. So there's a Summit of the Americas, which is supposed to be a meeting of the Americas to sort of hash out plans for the next few years about what the priorities for this region will be. But as you can imagine, it's always been a place of America using soft power, if not hard power, to sort of push back against governments that they don't like. And the United States is a country that, you'd be hard pressed to get a lot of Americans to talk knowledgeably about what's going on in both North and South America. And yet the American government plays a huge role in trying to push back against, any kind of progressive or left governments. They push back against sovereignty of other countries. And again, these should be, summits where countries are coming in and are meeting as equals. We'll talk about the OAS, the Organization of American States, in a second. But the Biden administration, and we're hosting this in the U.S., has gotten significant pushback because they are leaving out Cuba, they're leaving out Nicaragua, and they're also bringing Juan Guaido, the failed coup candidate in Venezuela, as the representative of Venezuela. Again, this is not somebody who has won the presidency. This is not somebody who's democratically elected. This is just somebody that the United States has picked as their boy in the area. And it's a complete slap in the face to diplomacy, to peace, to the kind of idea of countries all being equal. And there's been a lot of pushback. So let's play this real quick. This has been, a lot of countries have said that they might boycott the summit. This is AMLO. This is courtesy of Kwashwan News. It's in Spanish, but we got subtitles here for y'all. But let's just watch this for a second. And remember, this is why all the bullshit you hear about AMLO, the guy who just held another vote to see if whether or not he should stay in office. This is, somebody who has been trying to nationalize the lithium supplies of the country, somebody who's been trying to pursue more state investment and more state control of their electrical system. Somebody who is not perfect, but is trying to do a lot to democratize Mexico, a country that desperately needs it, as does the U.S. And all you get in the U.S. media is, oh, AMLO, this crazy tyrant, this anti-democratic fool, despite the fact, again, that he has opened up democracy in that country to a much greater extent than any of his predecessors. But here's him talking about this upcoming Summit of the Americas.
Si nos invita a todos, va a ir una representación del gobierno de México, pero no iría yo.
¿Quién iría a su representación?
Me representaría el canciller, Marcelo.
¿Cuál sería el mensaje? ¿Sería un mensaje de protesta?
Sí, porque no quiero que continúe la misma política en América. Y quiero, en los hechos, hacer valer la independencia, la soberanía y manifestarme por la fraternidad universal. No estamos para confrontación, estamos para hermanarnos, para unirnos, y aunque tengamos diferencias, las podemos resolver, cuando menos escuchándonos, dialogándonos, pero no excluyendo a nadie. Además, nadie tiene el derecho de excluir. Que nadie excluya a nadie.
I mean, that's as basic of a democratic and diplomatic principle as you can have, is to say that the countries who you're claiming to speak for with the Summit of America should have representation and should be invited. It's an absolute travesty that Venezuela, that Nicaragua, that Cuba are not going to be invited as of yet to these summits. If these summits are supposed to be a meeting place for these different countries to come together, to hash out differences, to negotiate, to have conversations about the future of these continents, it's unreasonable to sit around and say, well, we're only going to invite the countries that we like. And then you're just having a conversation with your friends. You're not doing diplomacy. Negotiation means that you need to have sides with different viewpoints and different desires and different needs. We've seen a pretty significant backlash to the United States, excluding certain countries. Bolivia has said that they will not go if Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua are not invited. Honduras has said they will not go. CARICOM, which represents the Caribbean nations, has also said that they are looking at a boycott, as has Guatemala. And this could really show like a pretty significant shift here, which would be beneficial for these countries and also for the United States. For the United States to start to meet countries in this part of the world as equals, instead of as countries that it can just sort of push around and decide who their president is, regardless of what the votes are saying. This would be beneficial for peace, for prosperity, for all peoples in the Americas. And it's really exciting to see this kind of pushback and people saying that, we're not going to play this game. We're going to push back against America, basically trying to dictate who is and who isn't an American. Again, an absurd position that the United States is putting forward right now, and a right that they don't have to designate which countries they believe should be included in these kind of diplomatic proceedings. Here is Gaston Brown, who is the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, talking here, I think, quite correctly and quite bravely on this matter as well.
Antigua would have been the first out indicating that we do not believe in ostracism, that the Americas belong to all of us. All of us are stakeholders. The Americas do not, or does not, the Americas does not comprise of the United States only. It comprises of all of the nations of this hemisphere, and we expect that as stakeholders, they should all be given an invitation whenever there is a summit of the Americas. It's not a summit of the United States, it's a summit of the Americas. Which means that they have a right to be present.
Yes.
We have stated our position that Juan Guaido, definitely no, we do not recognize him. He's not the president of Venezuela. The president of Venezuela is Nicolas Maduro. And for us to go and sit in a forum with Guaido, it would be a total disrespect to the Venezuelan government and certainly President Maduro. Cuba, on the other hand, we think that Cuba has been given a raw deal by the United States. What they have done with those sanctions is bordering and being criminal. They're innocent people in Cuba who are suffering. And whereas they're trying to force regime change, and incidentally, a democratic country trying to intervene in the affairs of another to force regime change. We can be so consistent, and I'm being sarcastic here, with our principles that it's not funny.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's extremely well put. Because if anything, the ending of the continuing of the U.S. Economic war on the people of Cuba, denying them their ability to choose their own leaders, denying them of the right to represent themselves, is an affront to democracy. It's an affront to diplomacy, and it's encouraging to see this pushback we're seeing from other countries in the Americas to the complete absurdity that the United States is going to be able to dictate, who is and who is not an American. And we're seeing results. So this is from earlier today, I believe. U.S. delegation is traveling to Mexico. I think this will happen tomorrow. Mexico's president has threatened to skip next month's Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles if nations are excluded. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has said a U.S. delegation will travel to Mexico this week to discuss the upcoming Summit of the Americas set to be held next month in Los Angeles, amid criticism that some nations will not be invited. Speaking at a news conference on Monday, López Obrador said the United States ambassador to Mexico, Ken Salazar, would take part in the talks on Wednesday. Mexican Foreign Minister Marcelo Ebrard said in a tweet that the special advisor for the Summit of the Americas, Christopher Dodd, charged with organizing the event, will also attend. The discussion came after López Obrador said last week that if United States President Joe Biden's administration excludes Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela from the summit, he would skip it and send a representative instead. I hope that this, turns out, to sort of pressure the United States government to include those nations, because it's a complete affront to democracy, and I'm hoping that we start to see the continuation and the building of alternative forms of diplomacy and negotiation for this region of the world, because the United States hegemony has not brought peace. It has not helped the people of the Americas. It has only been a soft arm of American power. Another great example of this history is the Organization of American States, which is, a complete farce of an organization. It's an organization that's heavily funded by the United States. The United States plays a huge role in deciding who is and who isn't going to be a member. And again, these are supposed to be, levels above national governments, where national governments can get together and talk and make collective decisions. And the United States basically saying we're only going to negotiate with these countries and not with these countries, shows the kind of backyard mentality that America treats most countries in the Americas with. And this shows, too, why these kind of victories that we've seen from Evo Morales and Mas coming back to power, from hopefully Lula coming back into power in Brazil, from AMLO winning in Mexico, from many of the other progressive and left governments that have come back into power in the Americas, we're seeing some of these results. And you're going to see a lot of kicking and screaming from the United States. But hopefully this ends in a much more democratic and much more diplomatic and a much more representative body that is able to hold and answer these huge questions that we have in front of us. How are we going to deal with climate change? How are we going to deal with international trade? How are we going to build up the Americas instead of just using it as a piggy bank for the United States to come in and exploit resources and then exploit workers who have to flee their country because of, failing economies, oftentimes caused by, if not directly American foreign policy, the policy of American multinational corporations. This is a member of Mas talking about potentially leaving the OAS here. This is again from Kashkawan News. I think it's worthwhile to listen to as well.
Siempre he estado al servicio de los más poderosos y en contra de los países democráticos, de países humildes, así como el pueblo boliviano. Así que en ese marco seguramente esa sugerencia de nuestro hermano Evo Morales va a ser debatido al interior de las filas del movimiento al socialismo y por supuesto de las diferentes organizaciones sociales que apostamos con este proceso de cambio.
And this is why the Moss victory was so important, not just for the people of Bolivia, but because Bolivia in particular, and they're not alone here, but Bolivia under Moss had been doing the work of trying to build alternatives to U.S. hegemony in the region, and obviously we have feelings about this, right? We want for countries who have historically been sort of left out of these processes, to be included and to be able to play leading roles in these kind of negotiations and the shaping of our future. But two, just drop those convictions for a second. Just on a basic level of building organizations that have the weight necessary to sort of tackle some of these challenges, you need to get rid of this cloud of doubt that currently exists. I'm sorry, when you see the way that the OAS conducts itself in other countries, there is significant doubt about their legitimacy, rightfully so. And if you want to create organizations that have the ability to play a major role in sort of pushing back, for example, against things like election fraud, against things like human rights abuses, against things like international corporations coming and pillaging countries, you need to create organizations that have legitimacy with people. And the OAS doesn't. The Summit of the Americas doesn't. And it doesn't because the United States has, stacked the deck for so long. The United States should welcome this opportunity to build up effective organizations that have the trust and legitimacy so that we can rely on them in tumultuous times. Because the fact is right now when the OAS comes into a country and they say this or that, people line up based on their preconceived notions, predominantly whether or not they're supportive of American foreign policy and the kind of supremacy of multinational corporations, or if they're against that. And if you want to live in a world that has a little bit more certainty, you should be supporting these kind of moves to open up and democratize these organizations, if not creating counter and independent organizations that aren't so poisoned by decades and decades and decades of American of American malfeasance there. But we got some. I'd be happy to take a couple more questions before we go. Feel free to drop those in the chat. But tomorrow we're going to be talking with Charade on Iran about the new government in Iran, about the Biden administration's just complete sitting on their hands when it comes to re-entering the Iran nuclear agreement, which I thought was should have been a slam dunk, and it really is criminal that they're continuing not only these Trump level policies, but also overseeing the sanction regime that is killing people, denying people medicine, denying people food, denying people safe equipment for cars and airplanes and things like that. It's truly is a stain on the Biden administration. And I'm really looking forward to sharing a conversation that we had with Asal, who is a really, really great voice on this and a wonderful Twitter follow as well, if you're not already on that. I have seen, I don't know if people saw this today, that there's this statue that was put up and there's a gentleman out there selling eggs to throw at the new Maggie Thatcher statue up there. Always good reminder that as bad as these people are, they all reach their end sooner or later. All right, y'all. Well, we got a hell of a lot coming up for y'all tomorrow. I'm excited to share that assault conversation with y'all. Next week, we got Matt Huber on. We're going to be talking about climate change as class war. Really looking forward to speak with Matt. We always learn so much with him. We're working on a few things, hoping, fingers crossed, that we are able to do some live shows in the fall. Can't announce anything yet. We're still sort of looking and seeing about the feasibility, but hoping to be able to take some of the stuff on the road. And as always, feel free to reach out. Appreciate everybody. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and I'll see y'all tomorrow at 7 Central.